concept of right to work and has both a historical dimension and you might call it a rhetorical dimension. Historically, in 1947, the U.S. Congress passed over President Truman's veto what was called the Taft-Hartley Act, which was the second big federal labor relations law. And this one attempted to kind of roll back some of the power of organized labor. And it's one of these big, long laws, lots of pages, lots of sections and subsections. And there's a subsection called 14B. And what that says is that any state that wants to, it doesn't have to, but each state in the Union has the option to pass a so-called right-to-work law. And North Carolina, in fact, was one of the first. In fact, there's one historian that wrote something like, the ink wasn't dry on the Taft-Hartley Act when North Carolina sort of jumped at the opportunity to pass a right-to-work bill. North Carolina has, for a very long time, been a very, very hostile territory to organizing unions. You can go back to the 1880s and the Knights of Labor and how they struggled here. It's always been hard, and there's all kinds of different theories. If you ask me, I say think of three things: economics, culture, and race. The first 200 years of this state's history, it was primarily agricultural and rural. The industries that were strong here, textiles, tobacco, furniture, tended to be lower wage, lower capital intensive, lower technology. They weren't like the giant auto plants and steel mills. They were harder to organize. The second thing is culture. North Carolina is much more rural than, say, Ohio is by then, or Massachusetts, and therefore small towns tend to be fairly insular. They're suspicious of outsiders. Organizers were seen as somehow people coming in from outside to, quote unquote, stir up trouble. And the third reason is race. Race is a national problem, but racism is especially virulent and especially a flashpoint in the South. Starting, especially in the 1940s and thereafter, many unions, not all, but many overtly said, we have to organize blacks and whites together. Otherwise, we're not going to be a strong union. Otherwise, the company will pit us against each other on racial lines. And of course, when you organize blacks and whites together, that was a threat to the system of white supremacy. And of course, that then feeds back into government policy. Either through the government or through things like the National Guard has always sided with capital and always broken strikes. So all those pressures just kept going year after year, decade after decade to make North Carolina today has the lowest unionization rate of any state in the country, and it's always been somewhere in the bottom 1, 2, or 3. And in fact, North Carolina deliberately used that as a selling point. I mean, at the turn of the 20th century, the North Carolina Department of Labor was advertising, come down to North Carolina, build your factory here. We have, these call it docile, unorganized labor. And of course, that became really powerful in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, when by that point, almost all of the textile industry was fleeing the Northeast and heading to the South. Because up north, by the 1940s and 50s, most of the textile workers had organized there. North Carolina, to this day, I mean, if you go on the Chamber of Commerce website, they tout the fact, come to North Carolina, we keep unions out. Therefore, you want to bring your business here. What those of us who support the rights of workers to organize, try to get through to people is, if North Carolina is such a great place because it doesn't have unions, why was our unemployment rate so high during the Great Recession? We were one of the top 5 highest states in the country. So this idea that unions drive out business and raise unemployment, well, if that argument held, North Carolina should have a very low unemployment rate. We should have been a magnet. Everyone should have flooded down there in the Great Recession. They didn't. In fact, states with more organizing have higher wages, lower poverty rates, higher tax revenue. All kinds of good things happen, but you just can't make that breakthrough with a lot of people.
Right to work state! Right to work state!
with right to work, again, it's a euphemism. It's a turn of phrase. The people who support these laws say it prevents "quote unquote" forced unionization. Then basically what the law says is that if you go to work for a company that has a union contract, the union has to cover you by the contract. Under American labor law, it's called the duty of fair representation. So the union has to give you the benefits of the contract, but you don't have to pay your monthly dues. So you, in effect, what the unions call it is it creates the free rider problem. People get all the benefits and don't want to pay the dues. So it's done as a way, it's an absolutely overt, it's not hidden, it's an overt tactic to weaken unions. It's a kind of poison pill. It says to unions, if you come to this state, you can bust your butt, you can organize a plant, get a contract, but you know what? People may not even pay the dues to help support the contract. So it's deliberately done to make your state more hostile to union organizing. But it's sold as we're protecting the poor innocent workers from forced unionization. In most states, if a worker really is unalterably opposed to joining a union, they actually don't have to join the union. They have to pay what's called an agency fee. They still have to pay for the prorated cost of the contract because they're getting the benefits. I mean, the analogy I make with my college students is, we'll just take fraternities and sororities. What happens if someone showed up at a fraternity and said, hey, I want to join your fraternity and have all the cool parties and, live in this really cool house and all, but I'm not going to pay my dues? What fraternity would let that guy in? They'd say, what, are you out of your mind? Forget it. But in a right-to-work state like North Carolina, you can go to a company. Company says, well, we're unionized, so you're getting this contract with better wages, better benefits, grievance procedure, workplace safety, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? You don't have to pay anything for it.